a handful of companies dominate, controlling more than 80 to 90% of the market share.
It is the worst kept and best insulated secret of Eskom.
When it happens to white companies, it is accepted as a norm.
Coal supplies to Eskom is no exception to that domination by these big monopolies.
An exclusive suppliers club milks the hapless power utility.
We call it the fixated and sitting capturers who've been entrenched, trying to stop the emerging capturers from capturing the very states they've had captured.
As the bleeding state-owned enterprise becomes a risk to South Africa's financial health, status quo is finally being challenged.
The shareholder should have an arm's-length relationship around actual procurement.
All the major companies that have existed and supported apartheid are the ones that continue to benefit.
Eskom is simply too important to the country to fail, and we will not allow it to.
It is about time that these are challenged so that we can, in practical terms, start to dismantle the edifice of apartheid that has remained, especially in the economy.
Will this mark the beginning of the end for the exclusive and competitive, anti-transformative and possibly collusive coal club afflicting Eskom?
Giant white-owned businesses have been exploiting Eskom for decades. An inconvenient truth always ignored and brushed under the carpet. Now the inconvenience has become a scourge. Eskom currently tops the list of tender benders, single-handedly devouring a whopping 31 billion rand of the total 37 billion rand worth of deviations from normal procurement procedure requested in 2016-2017. Simply put, lousy Eskom contracts are responsible for 84% of irregular expenditure approved by the Treasury.
There is a problem, Eskom. Everybody at Eskom is acting, having an acting chair, having an acting CEO, acting CO. It creates its own problem. It just says to somebody who's saving his or her money there that there's no stability there.
The plight of a captured, arm-twisted and bleeding Eskom has now become a hazard for the South African economy. Dismissed as an insignificant distraction for long, as the politically juicy narrative of state capture hogged the limelight. The powerless power utility cries for rescue. After multiple diagnoses and remedies, the treatment has finally begun. The parliamentary inquiry into the issues dogging Eskom got underway last week. The inquiry will revolve around alleged high-level corruption and corporate rent-seeking involving billions of rands. The committee is focusing on Eskom to begin with, followed by Transnet and Denel.
To calculate it with some degree of precision, the amount of that increase which could be attributed to corruption. I'm asking you this question because remember, every single year we have to sit here in Parliament and debate Eskom wanting tariff price increases on an annual basis. If we're able to get a sense of how much of that would be attributed to corruption, then it would be to some extent easy to tackle the debate. I know that you can't get a precise figure, but an estimate that we can use, for instance, would go a long way towards assisting us as politicians when we fight that battle on an annual basis.
But we have said within that this is a very large expenditure item, and there is some evidence that some of those contracts would have been more expensive than they needed to be. And frankly, to answer your question, we don't have the number. We haven't done the calculation of to what extent is rent-seeking and corruption added to the electricity price, and maybe that's something we should try to qualify in more detail.
Some MPs have called it the most important probe in Parliament's history, but the narrow focus and ambiguity surrounding the nature of probe has come under fire from various quarters. Some members of the ANC caucus, including new State Security Minister Bongani Bongo, went to Luthuli House in a bid to have the inquiry stopped. Public Enterprises Minister Lynn Brown and the State Attorney also wrote to the committee questioning its legitimacy. The hope of a fruitful and effective outcome dims, especially as one looks at the testimonies so far.
Let's provide more evidence for what might seem allegations in the booklet. For example, allegedly 6 of the 8 board appointments under Brown have links to the Gupta family or their associates. The evidence is there. This is well documented. But that additional information needs to be brought to the committee. I appreciate that.
Witnesses relying on innuendo, propaganda and hearsay.
Chair, the President took an unusual degree of interest in the board and managed positions of Eskom and Transnet in particular. Minister Hogan resisted this undue influence, which likely accounted for her dismissal 18 months after her appointment. Malusi Gigaba replaced Hogan as Minister of Public Enterprises in November 2010. In June 2011, Gigaba instituted the most radical board change in Eskom's then recent history. The existing and what was widely regarded as an experienced board, it even included CEOs of international power utilities, was gutted, and it was replaced with names that are largely unknown and without any obvious experience or capabilities either in the power sector or in overseeing large corporations. Let's provide more evidence for what might seem allegations in the booklet. For example, allegedly 6 of the 8 board appointments under Brown have links to the Gupta family or their associates.
Baseless allegations couched as irrefutable facts.
The advisor of Minister Gigaba, I think it was a gentleman called Siyabonga Mashlango, that asked me to see some people. He arranged a meeting where I was present. It was somewhere in Midrand. And there was one other individual in this discussion. I don't know at the time the individual. Even up until today, if you give me, I assume it was one of the brothers.
Does one of the individuals look like this?
I can't say.
You can't remember?
I can't.
The face. You don't remember the face?
I assume that it was one. It was not somebody that was very public or with pictures and things like that I would immediately recognize the face.
Selectively scrutinizing the contracts.
You ask what percentage of coal supplies by Gupta-linked coal mines. I don't know that, but it would not be. It would be certainly much less than 10%, and a much smaller number, probably.
Despite the pressure to have the inquiry stopped, hearings will resume and may continue over the next year. The timelines for parliamentary Eskom capture inquiry are vague. Its limited scope means in all likelihood we will not end up any wiser after its completion.
Well, as it will be recalled that the Standing Committee on Public Accounts had hearings with Eskom around some of its coal contracts. And it was in our engagement with that process and a deeper probe that gave us a sense that something was not right. We were focusing on one particular contract, and yet there were much bigger issues and areas of concern insofar as contracting is concerned, which we felt bordered on collusion, but most painfully, the fact that some of the contracting were actually a stumbling block to transformation.
So ANN7 now digs deeper to unearth the dark secrets hidden in South Africa's coal piles.
We call it the fixated and sitting capturers who've been entrenched, trying to stop the emerging capturers from capturing the very state they've had captured. So it's really literally about those who control the monopoly and whatever businesses, not wanting others to enter into it, and they will do anything by whatever means. But when you look at it, if it was really about finding wrongdoing, then we should have been looking at the 40, 50-year contracts that were signed in the 70s. Never mind the ones that have been signed in the 2000s, even up to last year.
The groundwork for this coal capture began as early as the 1940s. In pre-apartheid era, Eskom's coal suppliers were established mining companies selling coal through cost-plus and fixed-price contracts.
The government entered under apartheid into very long-term agreements with these monopolies that were located very close to the Eskom power stations. The problem with long-term agreements around coal supply is that the prices of coal may vary, but you continue to pay the same price that you agreed to in the initial agreement with regard to the coal supply to the power station, which means that if the price of coal falls, Eskom still buys coal at an inflated price because the original price was higher than the price when the price of the commodity fell.
A handful of players and absence of competitive bidding made for a perfectly conducive environment for unfair trade practices to breed. The beneficiaries of this decades-old exclusive coal club ironically made it to the most favoured list solely through patronage.
The government then got Eskom only to be building the power stations and then gave this select group of coal mining companies that were established to specifically then supply coal, but Eskom then had to foot the bill, so to speak, on every single aspect in terms of establishing the mine as well as on the cost of mining of the coal and supplied into the power station. Then these private sector companies, and very few of them, then they earned a fee for the coal that they mined to supply into Eskom. But also very puzzling is that they were further allowed to export the coal. So again, in terms of patronage, we saw the apartheid era government building a Richards Bay coal terminal in 1972, which got commissioned in 1976, which until recently was the largest coal export terminal in the world, which, by the way, is still controlled by this oligopolistic cartel of coal miners who were established by the state using taxpayers' funds, so to speak, for them to be able to be the big coal mining companies that they have come today.
As the curtains part, the spotlight falls on the Big Four, the coal conglomerate that accounts for 80% of Eskom's total supplies. The giants who secured 40 to 50-year-long contracts, most of which are still intact. This means guaranteed profits for the suppliers, supplies at the mining companies a wish and almost no room for maneuver for helpless Eskom. Fundamentally flawed and against the best business practices, they became a means to ensure that state billions were funneled to private coffers. Due to captive mines and decades-long contracts, Eskom has no option but to succumb to the terms and conditions laid down by the Big Four.
The other big thing that moved Eskom coal prices was the fact that the cost-plus mines was producing a lot less. And if you don't get coal from the mine right next to you and you have to buy coal and transport it, you more than double the price. But the coal pricing, we have, there's a lot more competent people than I. The head of coal was a lady, was firstly Dan Marakani, then Kiran Maharaj, very competent. Kiran particularly, I think eventually she also got suspended, but they procured the coal. We were very transparent with the regulator on the pricing and what are the issues with the price.
The fact is that South Africa's primary electricity supplier operates on an unsustainable business model, a model that guarantees profits for the suppliers, discourages cost efficiency, and holds Eskom to ransom. And one of the biggest beneficiaries of this skewed arrangement is Exxaro. Exxaro is the single largest supplier of coal to Eskom, accounting for over 30% of its total needs. And Arnott Mine is a glaring example of how private coffers are filled by state-owned enterprises running in losses.
Let's take a look now at how Exxaro was arm-twisting Eskom. Exxaro's Arnott contract was to end in 2023, insisted on renegotiation of contract as early as in 2015. Taking a further look, Eskom says Exxaro was charging 1,132 Rand per tonne for coal in 2015, and that same coal is available in the market for under 500 Rand per tonne. Exxaro unable to deliver on its full 4 million tonne commitment since 2011, and Eskom was getting only about 1 million tonne in 2015. Exxaro unable to deliver on its full 4 million tonne commitment since 2011, maintaining Arnott power station supply became a struggle. Furthermore, Eskom Exxaro contract price was forecast to rise over 1,300 Rand per tonne if extended, and the same coal is available in the market for under 500 Rand per tonne. Exxaro wanted Eskom to pay for development of Mooifontein reserves to reduce those costs, and the same coal was still available in the market for under 500 Rand per tonne. That's what we know so far.
How did they end up with a situation whereby Exxaro, for example, taking into account its history, that not only did it have where it was on this cost plus mine, it was being paid way over about what the actual cost would have been. And as somebody who knows about coal, somebody who knows about mining, I can competently tell you that the price of 1,132 Rand could never have been a cost that is reflective of the geology of that area. It is just completely was greedy, downright profiteering, but how has it been allowed?
What happened at Arnott is not an aberration. Eskom has not only been paying through its nose to buy coal at inflated prices, it is also paying for the coal it cannot and does not use. Where long-term contracts fail to squeeze Eskom, another draconian instrument comes into play. It's called take or pay.
Well, let's take a look now at how Exxaro was once again playing hardball with Eskom. Eskom pays 6.7 billion Rand for nothing. Eskom signed a long-term agreement with Exxaro that was in 2008. The contract for coal from Grootegeluk mine from Medupi power station. Taking a further look, Eskom hasn't been able to take any coal since May 2012. And coal could not be taken due to delay in construction and the lack of storage capacity at Medupi. Taking a further look here, Eskom has paid 6.7 billion Rand to Exxaro till date under take or pay clause, and also Eskom unable to claw back the money even though it is not taking any coal there. Further look, Exxaro reluctant to assist Eskom in exploring options to use Medupi coal stockpile, and Exxaro hesitant in transporting the coal to Richards Bay coal terminal. Further, Exxaro agrees to divert coal to Matimba power station, but only till 2017. And Eskom says Exxaro acting tough during negotiations to mitigate that impact. That is Eskom paying 6.7 billion Rand for nothing. That's what we do know for now.
Given Exxaro's brazenness, there's little hope that Eskom will ever be able to get its billions back. But it's not just about the money. These mining giants also shirk their social responsibilities, carrying a true hoots for transformation.
They developed a coal monopoly in South Africa. Okay, so 4 or 5 big companies dominated the coal market under apartheid and continue to dominate the coal market even after apartheid in South Africa. And the coal supplies to Eskom is no exception to that domination by these big monopolies. So Anglo Coal, Exxaro, Glencore, BHP Billiton, and so on were the companies that did the supplies.
What we have listed so far is not even the tip of the Kohlberg. Eskom has over the years tamely surrendered to such bullying because of monopoly control on coal supplies to different power stations. Strengthening this vice-like grip are cost-plus contracts. But what is a cost-plus contract? Price based on actual cost of production plus agreed-upon rates of profit. Requirements arising during implementation can lead to price renegotiation. Businesses have little incentive to reduce or control prices because as the prices rise, profits increase. The buyer has no room to maneuver vis-à-vis prices once the contract is signed. Now some have finally dared to disrupt these cozy, centuries-old, uninterrupted, secure channels funneling state billions.
We have launched a complaint and would want the Competition Commission to investigate and determine whether there is any wrongdoing by anybody. Safe to say that all the major companies that have existed and supported apartheid are the ones that continue to benefit from this unreasonable arrangement of cost-plus mines and, evergreen contracts.
2 members of the Standing Committee on Public Accounts, Themba Godi and Amanya Mezeli Boy, have approached the Competition Commission to probe the rot.
We launched 2 complaints. One has to do with the cost-plus mines. The second one has to do with the challenge of cross-directorship. We felt that the way these are so intertwined, individuals are directors in a variety of companies that all operate in the same space, does create the question, are these competitors or are these basically the same companies competing against each other, competing against themselves, meaning the possibility of collusion cannot be ruled out. And if you look, you'll find that most of these major companies, these white companies, are actually guilty of this challenge of cross-directorship. If people were directors of various companies that operate in different spheres, in different areas, in different fields, I don't think that will be an issue. But to the extent that they all operate within the coal industry and they supply, all of them supply Eskom, it does raise very, very serious concerns about whether is this legal or not. Are there any illegal activities that are going on? Because we have seen in recent times, and thanks to the Competition Commission, that big companies have been colluding on a whole range of things, from the building of stadia for 2010 to milk, bread, fertilizers, school uniforms, you name them. And unless and until such time that we as public representatives, especially as parliamentarians, take a stand and say no, the fight for economic transformation must not just be a slogan, but it must actually take a practical meaning by taking practical measures against practical challenges like we have done in this case of the coal companies.
The request to investigate possible collusion and uncompetitive practices implicates Deputy President Cyril Ramaphosa's Shanduka Trust. Ramaphosa's spokesman Tyrone Siale has been quoted saying it would be difficult to comment without a timeline, as Ramaphosa had divested from mining in 2014.
What also happened after 1994 was that the big monopolies managed to capture key individuals within the ruling party onto their boards and into their shareholding structures. You know, we can think in this instance about, you know, the Deputy President Cyril Ramaphosa was very close to Glencore and his investment company was very close to Glencore. If we think of Anglo Coal, Ashanti Vali Musa, the former Minister of the Environment, was very close to Anglo Coal.
The Commission has agreed to investigate the alleged collusion as well as a case of irregular contract extension.
These two honorable members of parliament, Godi as well as Boy, they need to be applauded for their courage to have now taken practical steps to be able to bring an end to this. The 1998 Competition Act, as promulgated, it was done so specifically to remedy this type of abuse of dominant position by this oligopoly of a cartel.
This is about time. This is a great opportunity for us to be able to start implementing the radical economic transformation that we all talk about. In this sense, that the transitional arrangement must be done. We don't have to worry about the probe that is happening. It's fine, it can happen. But the state has the power to ensure that those small businesses must be empowered firstly, but secondly, they must be given the opportunity.
A comprehensive, unbiased, thorough probe by the Competition Commission may lead to a much-needed coal market shake-up. It is the last hope of resuscitation for a dying enterprise.